Greetings, folks. Welcome back to the Jason Damico Show, and special shout out to our distributor once again, Simplecast, doing a fantastic job getting us out to Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and iHeartRadio, all those great platforms. And thank you to the listeners and the viewers for supporting the show. Over 120 something episodes now. Really appreciate it. And today's guest, man, what an honor to have him on the show. He is a Grammy Award-winning South African flautist, producer, and composer. Has won 7 South African Music Awards, perhaps even more to this day. We'll see in a second. He's used his classical training as a foundation. He's focused his attention on world and roots music, exploring the versatility of the instrument and fusing classical and contemporary sounds. Please welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen, my good friend now, Mr. Wouter Kellerman.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be talking to you.
Me too. It's such a pleasure to have you on, and we've been kind of Facebook buddies here for a little bit. And before we even get into it, again, congrats on the current Grammy nomination. It's fantastic for Pangea, I believe, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and I think we've got mutual friends on the Facebook list, many. I mean, dozens. So I'm sure we have a lot of paths that have crossed without us even knowing it. But really, really love your music. Really love your work, and would love to just kind of dive deep into your story and really just start with your beginning stages, how you got into the flute of all instruments, because it seems to be a rarity these days, you know?
It is. When my parents actually took me to a symphony concert, and they asked me which instrument I'd like to play. So they were very encouraging. I was about 10 years old, and I just loved the idea of expressing myself with breath, you know, using your breath, like in singing, you know. And so I think there's something about the flute that's just that has come for hundreds of thousands of years with humanity. The oldest flute is, they say, it could be older than language. The oldest flute that they found.
Wow.
So there's something really appealing about using your breath to express yourself. And for me, as a 10-year-old, I think somehow I connected to that. So I started playing the flute, and I just loved it from the first moment. I remember the first day after my first lesson, I went home and practiced for 3 hours.
Wow.
So I was just absolutely loving, and I had this beautiful teacher that was so encouraging. You know, she was so, it was just the right teacher to start with, you know. And I think I wish I could thank her, but I don't even, she only taught me for a year, and I don't know what her name was. It was many years ago. So, but she really made a big difference to the way I started. And then I just loved it. And I basically carried on through all my school years. I took music as a subject at school. And, but when I left school, I wanted to study music, but my parents didn't have any money to send me to university. So the only way I could go to university is with a scholarship. And I was offered a scholarship to study engineering. Because my two talents are the maths and music.
They go together often.
They do. And obviously my mathematical talent is more financially useful. So I was offered a scholarship, and then I went and studied engineering, which I also enjoyed. But my passion really is music, you know.
Yeah.
And so I went and I kept on at university. I appeared as a soloist with the Johannesburg Symphony Orchestra, so I kept the music very much active and going. And then after university, I got married, had kids, and started an engineering career And then after about 3 years, I decided I'm going to do music full time. And
Wow.
I swapped over to music. But I ran out of money within 6 months. And so I had to go back to engineering. And then every 3 or 4 years, I would make that same, I'd try again. And it was just expensive to have kids. And it was just impossible to make ends meet.
Yeah.
And at that stage, to make it with children, and also not being able to tour, because
Right.
I wanted to be home with my kids.
Right.
You know, because I got divorced early and I had custody over the kids, so I had to look after them.
Wow.
So basically, it just became impossible to be a full-time musician. But I kept on playing and trying, and eventually, like 20 years later,
Wow.
yeah, 20, when my daughter finished university and my son finished school, things got a whole lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And so I basically decided to try again, and by then I had paid off my house and my car, so I didn't have as many monthly debts, and then I was able to do it. I was able to, and people were telling me I'm crazy. I was in my 40s already. I had a successful engineering career, and they said it's just crazy to swap over and to do music full time at that age, you know.
Yeah.
But I was so passionate, and I really wanted to do it, and it's been something I had been waiting to do for so long. So then I managed, and since then it's been fantastic. It's been I've worked myself to the bone, and I love it, you know.
Yeah.
So, but I've worked really hard, and it's been fantastic. It's been amazing road to travel.
I had no idea. I mean, you can see when you're on your website and whatever, Wikipedia or any of these other sources, all the magazine articles about you, it didn't really hit. I saw the timeline of events, 9 records and quite prevalent in the scene since 2007. But to hear that, it didn't even register with me how much time it took for it to happen. And what a story. That is unbelievable. I'm so I'm encouraged by it, just from the artistic entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, that is just really commendable.
Yeah, I think it's pretty amazing what you can do if you really want to try. But yeah, my first album, I started making my own music in 2006, writing my own music. Before that, I was playing mostly classical music. I was a very serious classical musician. And in 2005, that's when I went full-time into music. And then what I did is I actually, at that stage, I'd never played using a microphone. It was mostly classical music, and then
orchestral, right? Or just
yeah, and chamber music and things. But so I knew the whole other world that I had been listening to, and that I'd been into, but I just didn't have the time to really get into. So I offered my services for free to a fantastic South African singer that I was a big fan of, called Nia Nell. And I said, well, I'll tour with you and I'll perform with you for free.
Wow.
For the next year. She said, okay, come over to my house. And I came over, we jammed a little bit, and she liked what I was doing, and she said, okay. And then I learned so much in that year, because this was more the pop world,
right?
And just how to be on stage, and how to use the monitors, how to use in-ear monitors, how to adjust how far the flute must be from the microphone for the best sound, and all that stuff. So I developed kind of that those skills that you also need. And then after that year, I felt I was ready to start my own thing. And I released my debut album and took it from there.
Let me ask you about the classical background. So, when did you? So you started writing pretty recently. Then you said about 2006.
Yeah, because in the classical world, it's actually you just read.
It's a lot of reading.
You don't improvise. You don't you don't write anything, and that's how you'll find that most. I mean, 95% of classical musicians don't write their own music, or they don't really improvise, and it's kind of sad because it's such an important part of music, you know, and it's really hard for classical musicians to start improvising. I found it hard, having read everything. So I can read very well, but I found it hard. And so basically my guitarist at the time is also my yoga teacher.
Oh, wow.
And we were both, he's a classical guitarist, and we were both completely clueless when it comes to improvisation, you know. But because we were both so clueless, we felt very comfortable with each other trying stuff, because you didn't feel embarrassed if it sounded really bad.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And so we basically in 2005 we'd meet twice a week we'll first do a yoga session, and then we'll do like a music session, and then we'll just play anything that comes into your mind, you know. Basically there was no rules, we didn't know what to do, and that's how we started writing. Eventually things started crystallizing, you know. Some random things you do sound better than others, so you keep it,
Right.
and you kind of record it on your phone, and then the next time you just build on it a little bit more, and slowly we recorded enough songs to make an album, and that was the first album.
Do you find when you write that, because I find this often, a lot of the great stuff that you keep that really turns into something, it was like just a little, maybe even beyond an experiment. It's almost like a mistake when you're practicing or running through something. It's like, oh, I like that. I haven't played something like that before. That really works. And then it opens this door to a
Exactly.
whole
It's
piece.
actually, yeah, I learned a lot. It's just a random event, really, that you you know, that you happen to like. And
Right.
my first producer that I worked with, who produced my first album, I noticed he was very messy and was quite anti-intuitive, counterintuitive for my engineering background. But because, like, when he moved stuff around he worked in Logic, and when he moved stuff in the project, he wouldn't be exact. He would just drag something and then drop it off anywhere, you know. And I was like, you know, move it. If you want to move it 8 bars, move it exactly 8 bars.
Yeah, it's got to be on the grid, right? You know?
Yeah, you're on the grid. Don't just drop it anywhere. But what I discovered is that he was using that as a creative tool without even knowing it.
Right.
He was kind of just a messy, you know, he would just move it. He just didn't have that kind of very accurate, exact way of working. But he would drop it, and it would be one beat off, and you go, oh, but that actually sounds really interesting.
Right.
and then I kind of figured out that could be used as a creative tool, like, you know, Edward de Bono, the big creative thinker, was like saying, you know, I read some of his books, and he was like saying, if you want to look at any matter from a different point of view, just look around in the room, and like I'm looking at a lampshade now, and connect the lampshade to your problem at hand.
Wow.
It's just a random point that you connect, and then that changes the way you look at something. So for me, that all kind of locks in, and in the same way, like you're saying, you might be making a mistake. You know, you might do a really bad improvisation, and you kind of miss the chord changes, and but when you listen back and go, okay, well, that's quite interesting. I can use some of that.
Right.
You know, yeah.
Right.
And that's basically,
and then just do another pass and see what happens.
Yeah. So it's actually, it's not such a big mystery to compose and to write music. That's what I discovered, because up to then I had held composition as such a high art that was not for me. You know, that's how I thought about it. And then I realized basically you just do a whole lot of random things and then you choose the best things.
You know, it's fun. I was always the kid who I actually remember this really vividly. I don't know if I've ever said this on this show before. So I was in 3rd grade and I was playing percussion. I started out as a drummer and whatnot. So I'm playing bells in this this little, you know, school recital. And I think the whole semester I was winging it. I really wasn't reading. I never liked reading. I took reading lessons. I took them for years. I had great teachers and mentors, and it was always like pulling teeth to get me to read. So I just remember in the midst of, you know, a couple hundred people out there, families, you know, parents of the students, I just started going to town on the bells and start doing my own thing, like probably hitting wrong notes and whatnot. And I was always that kid just trying to rewrite what was on the page. And then, you know, lo and behold, oh, I'm a writer. Oh, I'm a producer. Like it, you know, I get it. And then you hear that other folks are the same way. I have a lot of respect for folks that, like yourself, just killer readers, because it was such a discipline that I had to work on. And I never really was able to, again, it was like pulling teeth, you know, it's a real skill. And
but you know, like it's always the thing that you don't have that you have respect for.
Right.
So, you know, on the other hand, that kind of skill that you have of producing and creating, for people who read all the time, that's like a magical skill. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I had, that's why I said, for me, improvising and creating was the hard thing to get into. So, you know, it's just always, you always think the skill that you don't have is so much more special.
Well, it must have been really some experience when everything kind of clicked for you.
Yeah.
I mean, walk me through that. There must have been some moment or some time on stage, some time in the studio where really things started dialing in. And because when you're reading, you're playing you're getting everything, right? You're getting all these different scales. You're getting you have to be able to play the phone book, literally, in orchestral music. Yeah. So you have all the chops, you have all the techniques. And then when the creative just kind of meshes with your technical, that must have been great. I mean, was there any time where that really just kind of clicked for you, and what was that like?
Well, I remember composing my first piece because, you know, on the flute, you have your keys and you can't really slide between the notes, you know, and then I had this training flute called a fife. It's the Yamaha fife. It's like a $10 training flute.
Right.
Plastic training flute, and with that, it's just a tube of plastic with a couple of holes in it, you know, and basically, so we were just trying things, and then with that you can take your finger slowly off the hole, and you can glide between the one note and the next note, and it's more expressive, you know.
Yeah.
So I remember trying something and thinking, wow, this is beautiful. Just that glide. And I said to my guitarist friend, well, let's just do like a very plain, you know, chord sequence, you know, 1, 6, 2, 5. And I'll just try and fit in some gliding notes in there. And just being beautifully expressive. And then soon we had a whole melody composed. And that became one of my most popular melodies, just from that simple concept and that simple idea. And that was really quite mind-blowing for me,
Yeah,
you know, it's kind of, realizing it has been in you all this time. You thought it wasn't for you, and other people compose, and that's how a lot of classical musicians think. They think they play the music that other people write, and so it was a door that opened for me, realizing that I can write myself. Yeah.
Were there any influences when you were younger, that really inspired you to play? What type of music were you really getting into at that point?
Yeah, in my house there was only classical music.
Okay.
So we had one record that was not a classical album, and that was Miriam Makeba, which I played that record over and over. It's a big famous South African, and she's the only South African individual Grammy winner before me. She won a Grammy in the 60s with Harry Belafonte, and she was just absolutely mind-blowingly beautiful voice. And so I listened to her, but when my mom went to work in the mornings, the lady who looked after me played African music the whole morning. So even though I grew up in the classical world, I had listened as part of my everyday to African music, and that's just been part of me and my culture. In South Africa, we've got this incredible richness of music and culture. We have 11 official languages, and each language has got its own music and its own dance forms.
Wow.
So the incredible richness, and such a privilege to grow up and to experience that, something that you take for granted, that you don't realize how special it is until later. When we started traveling, we realized, oh, that's not a given. People don't grow up in that kind of wide variety of musics, that you can listen to.
This might be a little bit of a redundant question, but I had on my notes, South Africa, any major differences? That obviously sounds like one major difference, because obviously in America, there's a lot of music here for sure, but a lot of it was more indicative of kind of like blues roots, American roots, and a lot stemmed from that, and really kind of penetrated the world. What would, in your terms, what's kind of like the big difference between South African culture musically compared to American? I mean, it could be even from a playing live standpoint, playing to audiences. How do the audiences react? What are some of those differences?
Yeah, I think it's just a wider culture. Kind of in the US, there's incredible richness here as well in the US. But the average person probably doesn't listen that widely. That's what I found. When you speak to the average person, it's not a given like in South Africa. We get exposed to so many different things that you kind of are automatically listen to a whole lot of, the radio stations play such different music, so your kind of vision is just wider.
Right,
and obviously we have all the American music as well.
Oh yeah.
So and the people in South Africa are very influenced by jazz and blues and American pop.
Who were some of the biggest artists that were, when you were growing up? I was just curious, American artists in South, what were you hearing on the radio?
Well, actually, the funny thing is the Beatles were banned in South Africa.
Really?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah,
wow. Who would have known that? Wow.
Yeah. So, because they used the Lord's name in vain.
Wow.
Yeah, that
Was that what in the lyrics or was it
yeah, in the lyrics. In the lyrics, I mean,
wow.
it's a very conservative. The apartheid world that I grew up in was very conservative. So the Beatles were banned, um, and there was so and because the Beatles were banned, we were a bit behind the curve.
Yeah.
We were always lagging a decade behind, you know.
They only changed basically everything, right? You know, it's
But I don't know if you heard about this story about this artist called Rodrigo.
no. Well, I haven't even
Um,
heard of that artist, I don't think.
Yeah. So what happened was he was an American artist, and he made beautiful music. But his music, because the Beatles were banned, I think, in South Africa, when his music hit South Africa, it was like, because we didn't have that history of the music, it was different how we experienced it. So the
Right.
people in the US experience his music as something they've heard before. But in South Africa, we hadn't heard that kind of music before. And he became incredibly famous and popular in South Africa. But his record label didn't tell him.
Ah.
So he didn't know he was famous in South Africa. And he
You know, I think I actually have heard this story.
Yeah.
And then he's
Yeah.
like in his 40s or 50s and he goes down there and people just
Yeah,
start
yeah.
going
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was just a funny, but just to connect it to our line of conversation, I think part of the reason he was so popular there is because we didn't have the Beatles. So his music was much fresher to our ears than would have been otherwise if we did have the Beatles. So yeah, it's a whole different perspective and a whole different way of growing up with music. So I think just because I grew up in South Africa, I have a different way of listening and being in music.
Well, let me I'm going to shift gears real quick and go back to your writing, and whether it's with collaboration or writing by yourself. I was curious to see how you stay inspired and really what your method is for writing these days. And we kind of touched on it a little bit in the past on literally learning how to write from the classical, from that background, and then, learning how to improv and really get, the creative juices flowing. What is your writing method, if there is one?
On in the same way that we started.
Okay.
And it really helps me to write. I create with the flute, and it's nice to have somebody else creating the harmonic content. So I usually write with someone, and whether we're sitting together, which I did with my guitarist in my first album, or in this last album that just got Grammy nominated, I wrote that with my collaborator David Arkenstone.
Yeah.
And it was during the pandemic, so we were in different continents. So he would send me like a musical bed with some ideas,
right,
and then I would just improvise some melodies over it, and be in my studio and record ideas, and then sit and edit the ideas. A lot of the work happens in the editing,
right,
because many of those initial ideas that I lay down are really bad. So it's in the editing where I take the gems and the nice moments and the interesting ideas, and I kind of put them together, and that's basically, then I send it back to him, and then he changes whatever he wants to from his side, sends it back to me, and that kind of to and fro. Once we're ready, we then go ahead and do whatever overdubs and instrumentation, other instrumentation that we would like. And that's basically the process that we used to create this album, Pangea.
It's exciting. Looking forward to seeing what happens this time around. You know, obviously in 2014 you won that, and was that your first Grammy with Winds of Samsara?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was a collaboration with Ricky Kaj then.
Yes. Yeah. So he's in India. He's an Indian composer.
Well known in India from what I read.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so basically we worked in the same way that I worked with David Arkenstone now. We worked then, and actually I had some finished songs already that I sent to him, and he had some finished songs at the time. And then we just kind of worked on each other's songs. And so that was Winds of Samsara 2014. So that was my first Grammy nomination, and that happened to win that year, which is just a mind-blowing experience. Big change in my life.
Well, I gotta say, it's well deserved. There was this one video that I saw when I was prepping for the show. I believe the title was, and correct me if I'm mispronouncing this, Mahatma. Was that one of the songs? Really love that track and the video that went along with it. I really thought, I mean, I was reading the comments, everybody's heart was really touched. We'll put a link to that down below in the description box when this is aired. And if anybody's listening to this interview, watching this interview, who has not seen that music video, really heartwarming, incredible story. Who came up with the concept for that? I thought that was brilliant with the two kids.
Yeah, we had this beautiful filmmaker, Sairam, that we worked with at the time in India, and so yeah, he came up with the concept for the music video, and that song was written for Mahatma Gandhi.
Okay.
And we also wrote a song called Madiba for Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
How that album got started, because being Indian and South African, that was kind of the first places where we would have loved to go, and we really liked what we did together. So then we created the whole album. But yeah, that album started kind of a culture in my subsequent music creation, and that's to create nice music videos, beautiful music videos to go with the music, because these days people consume music in a visual way more so than in the past, since YouTube. So I've really tried to create the music videos that would really enhance the music. And we've been putting it out on YouTube, even for our latest album as well. We've got one song called Desert Moon, which we also, this was shot during the pandemic times. So I was in Australia at the time, and David was in California, and Ayon, the singer, was in England.
Wow.
So we had to try and find a desert. So I found 3 hours from Melbourne, I found this kind of deserty landscape, and I took a friend of mine, we shot some footage. Then David shot some footage on the beach in California, and Ayon found some footage in England, but it was just too disjointed. So we needed some kind of unifying concept. So we thought of sand art, these people who paint with sand on a screen. So I went on YouTube and found this beautiful sand artist, and then I just randomly reached out to her on Instagram, and she responded, and I sent her the music, and she was just so keen. And she just created this beautiful sand art, and that became the line, between all the different aspects. Yeah. So if you watch the music video now, you wouldn't know it was, in over 4 continents, created over 4 continents. But, so that's been kind of, we've been really seriously looking at music videos and trying using the visual component as a vehicle to transport people, with the music and the visual elements.
Well, I've got to say, we've had a lot of guests on the show, and by far, one of the best online presence you and your team have it. I mean, it is on YouTube, on Google. It's exquisite. Whether the Game of Thrones video, I think that was one of the ones that really kind of like catapulted your numbers. It's been out for 8 or 9 years now, but it was, kind of like a viral sensation, garnering over a couple of million views at least. And how did that inspiration come about? Was that just your idea, or was, did you watch the show? Were you a fan of it?
I actually, I was following a violinist who did that kind of Game of Thrones one, and I thought that was a really good idea. So I just decided to do it on the flute, where all the parts are played by flute.
Bass flute, alto flute, the whole section. It was great.
Yeah. And so basically that really took off. And but the one that really took off, the video that really took off was, I'll tell you this little story. So we were in South Africa, and we had this corporate function coming up, and we had been working with choirs, the Soweto Gospel Choir. I did a whole album with Soweto Gospel Choir and Symphony Orchestra, but they weren't available for this corporate. So we looked for this, for another choir, and we found this choir that's was based 3 hours from Johannesburg, in this little village called Mutse. They called the Ndlovu Youth Choir. And so they were completely unknown, but we found them, and we did this corporate with them, and I just loved them. They were just amazing. So I decided to do a song with them. So we did an African version of Ed Sheeran's Shape of You.
Yeah.
And that went completely viral. Yeah, that just went completely viral. And then what happened was America's Got Talent saw this clip and loved the kids, and reached out to them and asked them to enter America's Got Talent. And so basically, so they went over to the States, and they went all the way to the finals of America's Got Talent, and they became famous in South Africa, and now they one of the most successful groups in South Africa. And just to see that whole, to see them grow from being completely unknown to now having so much work and basically having their lives sorted, and was just a beautiful process to see. And that's what something like YouTube or Facebook can do. Yeah, musicians. Yeah.
Well, and to also tag on to that, philanthropy is one of your something that you're obviously involved with, and I think it's great. Would love to talk about how you kind of got into that, or maybe the spirit of working with SOS Children's Village and whatnot. I think this is a great story.
Yeah, this is just something I've always wanted to do. I love kids, and I just feel, the best investment you can make into the future is to invest in the child, because if you can make a tiny little difference in that child's life, they carry that difference into their future. And if you could take a child that's lost, that doesn't have parents, that's got a really bad future mapped out in front of them, probably a future of crime and being on the streets, and if you can change that child's life, you actually changing the world, because they different people, they become better citizens, and they influence everybody around them, and they have kids, and you actually change the whole trajectory of the future. So so that kind of idea combined with my just loving them, about 20 years ago, I did some research to see where I can make the biggest difference. And I discovered the SOS Children's Villages, where they take kids that don't have parents, they've lost their parents, or they were abused by their parents, or they lost them through AIDS or some way. And then what they do is they create a house with 10 kids and a house mother. And often that house is based in a little village.
Mm-hmm.
So they create family for these kids. So these kids would have had nowhere to go, but they now have a family and an extended family in the village. And so there's one such house in South Africa, just south of Johannesburg, in Ennerdale, about a half an hour's drive south. And so I basically just decided I'm going to help one such house. So I've been sponsoring all the living expenses for 10 kids for the last 20 years or so.
Wow. That is so great.
So basically all my CD sales go towards the kids.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible.
Streaming, that kind of thing.
That's incredible. Well, I'd love to digress for a second and ask I've been throwing this question in quite often over the last how many episodes, especially with performers. Best on-stage experience and worst on-stage experience. Just kind of like a fun question here. You know, anything that's just like really memorable. You know, and you don't have to name any names if you don't want to, since it is on the record. But
yeah. So the best. My band always says this is the best experience in their lives, because we've played everywhere. You know, we've played Carnegie Hall a few times, which is one of the best. But probably the best one was when we went to Jodhpur in India, and we we did this collaboration with the local folk musicians that. You know, nothing is written down. They haven't really traveled, but it's basically centuries, thousands of years of passing the music on from parent to child.
Wow.
And, so basically we were booked to play at the Rajasthan International Folk Festival. And so we arrived there, and we arrived there a few days earlier so that we can do this collaboration with the local musicians. And they got together and they played us some of their music, this group, and they just blew our minds. And the next few days, and they didn't speak any English, so we had a musician translator who was like the in-between. And so that was, I mean, just to collaborate and create music between Africa and India, and somehow so easily find the common link, you know, was just mind-blowing for us. We couldn't believe it, that how in tune we were, you know. And so I did the Saturday night, we did this collaboration on the fort on the top of the hill, and then the Sunday morning I did a collaboration with the Indian classical musicians, a dawn concert, you know, at 5:30 in the morning. We were on the sitting outside, and the sun was coming up behind us as we were playing. So those two was just indelible experiences. So my band still till today will say that was the highlight of all our travels. And then the worst musical experience, probably my worst concert ever was, you know, the National Flute Association in the US. They're huge, and every year they've got their conference, which is basically the biggest get-together of flutists in the world. And it's very nice to play there. And we did a beautiful concert in Las Vegas when it was in Vegas. Then they asked us again to play in Washington, D.C. And this time I couldn't bring my band. So, you know, so basically they said, don't worry, we have a band for you. We've got this jazz band, these jazz artists, and they're amazing. You know, they'll play with you. And I said, okay. So I sent the music ahead of time, and I said, okay, we'll need a few rehearsals when I get there. And they were saying, no, well, 1 3-hour rehearsal will be enough. And I said, no, I don't think that's gonna cut it, because you have to also see, for the National Flute Association, you play for other flutists. So it's your most critical audience that you'll ever come across, because everybody in the audience are obsessive flute players,
right?
You know, and they know everything about the flute.
It's like swatting the hornet's nest, you know, going in there.
Yeah. So it's the most nerve-wracking experience probably, because I've played for huge events where I wasn't nervous at all, but this, especially not having my band. But anyway, so I convinced them to have 2 rehearsals. I sent them all the music ahead of time, MP3s, sheet music. They said, don't worry, we are jazz musicians. We can read and we can improvise. You know, I said, yeah, but I mean, this is, you know, there's some unique cultural elements to this music. You really need to look at it. And I arrived at our first rehearsal and I realized they didn't even have a look at the music. They hadn't even looked at it. So because they're so, and that's my kind of, I love jazz and I love jazz musicians, but some jazz musicians are very, they just think they can do everything.
Yeah.
And they don't, they just don't get it.
I know.
You know?
I know.
So anyway, so
we love our jazz guys, but it is a thing. Like, it is an industry thing. Like, people just know, you know, there's a certain percentage. Yeah,
that people are very elitist and snobbish and think they're just better than everybody else.
Yeah.
So that it's a minority of people, but you come across them, you know. So anyway, these guys, my first song has only got 2 chords. And so we started rehearsing this, and after half an hour working on this one song with 2 chords, I had to abandon it.
Oh my God.
They just couldn't get it, because they didn't do the work, because it had a kind of a unique African way about it.
Yeah, did it have like a meter, like a odd time or something? Okay. Yeah,
It was a different kind of groove.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not, you can't say a piece has got 2 chords only, so anybody can play it.
Right.
It's just not like that in world or global or folk music. Often there's some really intricate things, subtle things that you need to work on. And so I had to abandon my whole show and try and do what they could do, you know. So I had to change my whole approach. And then that was the one thing. And then the second thing was it was held in a ballroom. You know, these ballrooms, hotel ballroom.
Right.
And they're very dry with like carpets and curtains. So we're doing, like, we've got a half an hour sound check. We do a sound check before we perform. And so I always do my initial sound check without any reverb, just dry. And we did that, and it sounded, you know, the EQ, everything was sounding good. I said, okay, now just add some reverb. And the guy said, the sound engineer was like, reverb? What reverb?
Oh God.
So they didn't actually they didn't have reverb. So And you know, a flute is not meant to be played in. It's either in a hall with some natural reverb, or if you're in a dry setup like that, you should have some reverb in your. If you play on a mic, and so basically, I was playing in this completely dry setup with this group that I had 2-3 hour rehearsals with, and we were just completely, you know, non-rehearsed, unrehearsed. Basically, they were unrehearsed. And it was just a dreadful concert. It was dreadful. in front of 5 peers.
Dreadful and dry. That's funny. But you survived. And you know, that's great. It's all part. That's why I love asking that question, because the stories that you hear are just unbelievable. You know, some of these stories we've had guys on where, you know, they're on tour and an axle breaks on the trailer, you know, and then they're late. And then there's other stuff where there's fist fights. Like, I mean, you just hear all these crazy stories. So I always love asking that question.
Yeah, actually, the other thing that happened in that show is because I had to decide on the order of the songs. And I have this one song that is not that easy on the ear. It's harmonically very complicated. And but it's very interesting and I love it and it's beautiful, but not everybody gets it, you know. So I basically decided, I always have a difficult decision where to put it in the running order. You know, you can't put it at the beginning or the end. So I decided I'm going to start with 2 strong songs, and then the third song will be this song. So the 2 strong songs, my band, I mean, they were still okay, and it was dry, but it was still okay. And then after the third song, half the audience stood up and walked out.
Oh. So was this before or after the Grammy?
This was after I had won the Grammy already. This was like maybe 4 years ago. So
hey, I mean, what is going through your mind in that? At least you can say, hey, you know what? I won a Grammy. Yeah, think about that. That's like somebody's got to learn something from this out there is listening to this. I mean, Grammy Award winning, and half the audience walks out. I mean,
yeah. But what I actually discovered afterwards, and I didn't know this before, is this because I was doing the late evening concert, which is like I think 10 p.m.
Okay.
But this is the National Flute Association conference, so they have a 5:30 start on yoga flute. So a lot of the people they come for the evening show just to see what's happening.
Right.
You know, I didn't realize that. So that was partly it. So they stay as long as they're compelled to stay.
Yeah.
You know, and then they want to go to bed. So
right, yeah. Understand.
But I mean, I didn't know that. So just imagine I'm here in front.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I'm there in front. I'm playing with this band that was not rehearsed in this completely dry. And I'm trying my best to save this thing. And the third song I'm playing, the half the audience just walks out. It was really bad. And I had invited some of my Grammy friends to this concert. Some of the Grammy voting members, because I had something in the running that year as well, and it was just very embarrassing. So, yeah,
that's wild. I wanted to. I've got a couple of things I wanted to bring up here as we start to kind of wrap up. Oh yeah, so themes. Yes. So I've read about kind of your thematic peace and love, you know, how you kind of intertwine that into your music and how that's been the origin and the genesis of it. Would love to dive in a little bit more deeper to that. Is that from a place of spirituality for you, or is that just kind of like a universal principle, because I think it's great. And obviously people, musicians associate love with music, but sometimes it can be more from an egocentric point of view. I know in America, that's a big thing. Like, that's a big thing I have to work on myself over the years, and would just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Basically it's how I live my life. Basically, I know it's very cliched, and sometimes I know it's very cliched, but it really, for me, I really believe in caring about other people, and I kind of really feel that that's what makes the world go round, you know. And I see so much love around me. In the news, you hear all the bad things, but if you look around you, there are so many kind and loving people, generous to a fault, and kind and loving, that I experience every day. And I try and live my life like that as well. And it kind of comes in the music, so it's just natural for me. In the music, I try and express myself with a good energy. And so the music can be mysterious, but it's never, the kind of music, the movie music, when something really bad is going to come, is just about to happen. You know, that kind of music.
Very dissonant.
Yeah, and my music, it's not like that. It's not kind of impending doom. It doesn't spell impending doom. But it can be very dissonant. It can be dissonant, and it can be mysterious, and it can be complex. But the main thing is it's about sharing my passion and the beauty of the world. And so my music is kind of focused on that, you know.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because now that I think of it and I think of all your visuals, it's true. Because you got this beautiful landscape in the videos. It transcends just the music.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of how I think about it. And I sometimes feel uncomfortable on putting a Facebook post up with all those cliched words, but that's really how I feel.
Yeah. Well, but your authenticity is resonating with a lot of people, because the numbers don't lie, and your career is, I mean, it speaks for itself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so basically I'm just carrying on that route, and that's what drives me. You know, I love beautiful music, and I'm just trying to share it, and that's basically what keeps me going.
Well, it's definitely beautiful. That's a great word, and it's a lot of music out there is not beautiful. You know, yours is. So I use that word very sparingly, because it's not often. It's not really often found. You know. So future plans for you as far as the new record, and I also want to dive in a little bit. We didn't get too much into gear and whatnot, because we do have some production folks that listen in. I did hear on an interview of yours in the past something about when you started recording, and there were some issues with capturing the flute, and then somehow you were able to work through that. I thought that was a really interesting bit about finding the right chain and the mic and the preamps and all that. Well, I'd love to just kind of hear your little story on how that happened.
Yeah, it was when my first album, which I'd waited so long for. So when I went into the studio to record it, I was just like really disappointed. I was very disappointed with how it was captured. I mean, the flute sounded just terrible. It sounded terrible. And so basically I went from studio to studio to studio to studio, and it all sounded like really bad, and I thought I was going crazy. until this one producer asked me to come and play on a film soundtrack. So I played on there, and he made it sound beautiful. The flute sounded exactly the way I wanted to hear it, you know. So I just immediately after the session, because he played it back to me, I mean, I just recorded, and he didn't have to do anything. Everything sounded great.
Yeah.
So I just, I said, okay, I need to write down what you're doing here. So, so I wrote down his microphone.
That's the engineer in you, right? Got to reverse engineer it. Got to.
Yeah, exactly. And so I wrote down the microphone, the preamp, you know, everything he was using, and all the settings.
Yeah. Very important.
Yeah. So my manager, Tulsi, happened to be in New York at the time. So I phoned her and said, bring back this, and this, and this. So she bought it. And I got all that equipment. And I just invested in it. It was very expensive, but I just thought it was worthwhile.
So worth it.
And so basically, I think the difference, just having the right microphone, you know, that makes such a big difference, you know.
What is your go-to? Are you using a condenser usually?
This is a Manley Gold Reference.
Okay.
Yeah, which is, and I've been to many different studios, and I usually take my own mic in, and then I'll have my mic and their best one or two mics, and I'll put all three of them up, and then I'd have options, you know, and
right.
And I'm like, people always tease me because I love options, but it takes so much time to have all these options, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, always I've preferred my own mic to any other mic that I've been recorded on. So that's just become my go-to mic, and but I think as a bigger picture, I think as a musician, you have to take responsibility, you know, because for the eventual sound.
Mm-hmm.
In the classical world, for example, you'll find that a classical musician will go into the studio and record and won't be happy, but there's nothing they can do, you know, because they're not doing it themselves.
Right.
And so basically, I'm just saying, as a musician, you should be responsible. Go find the best studio, and also I do my own editing, because I just find nobody else can edit me and select the way I want to be heard.
Yeah, it's really self-production in a way. You have an engineer, you have a space, a room, and then you're really doing some, you know, self-production for sure. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So basically, yeah. And a lot of musicians don't do that. You know, they just go in the studio and I think they feel quite powerless because they have no control over the rest. You know, they just go in the studio, and then there's always a compromise to be made.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't really have to make that compromise.
No, you don't.
No, and I drive everybody crazy around me. In the music world, everybody gets very upset with me at some stage during the process, because I won't let it go if it's not right.
It's got to be right.
And I'll just redo it, but in the end, they still want to work with me again, because it ends up being beautiful, you know, and they're happy with the results. So I find that even though they got a little bit irritated with me in the process, because I can be such a perfectionist, they nearly all the time they do want to do it again because it ended up being beautiful, you know.
Yeah.
So, but I think you kind of have to, you know, that music is going to be there forever, and you kind of really have to kind of take care, you know, with it and make sure that at least you are 100% happy with it.
It gets to the place where, for me, it's when I finally hear it and there's nothing that I want to fix anymore. That's to me when I know that it's done, because other than that, you can be playing around until, you know, the universe explodes and we're all gone. Because I don't really know. Everybody has that question. When is it done? It's done when you just know when it's done. When it's either the deadline comes up and there's nothing, you cannot make it physically sound better than what it is. And really, to me, it's just when something, it just isn't bothering you anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. You really don't want anything to bother you. Sometimes, I mean, that's, I remember the one piece I did for my second Grammy nomination, that album. I did a flamenco piece, and I wanted to find that way in the middle between what I do and the flamenco language. And we finished the whole song. We spent a huge amount of time on this song, and the album was ready to go. I was listening in my car, and I was like, no. This is just not.
Isn't it the worst feeling too? When you, it's like, God, I gotta go. It's just.
Yeah. And then I went back to my studio. I spent another 100 hours just on the flute.
Wow.
Because everything else was perfect. Just the flute wasn't there. You
wow.
know? So I spent another 100 hours recording flute.
Wow.
You know, I spent like another month, basically, just on the one track. And so
I thought I was bad. This is a whole other level.
No, this was ridiculous. But you know, the thing is, because it's so hard to find that way, there's so many ways to do this thing.
Yeah.
You know, and eventually I still wasn't happy, but then I just gave up, and I was just like, okay, this is as far as I saw that I wasn't getting anything any better. I had reached the max I can with that present skills that I had. I really tapped the max out of my resources.
Right.
I let it go. But that kind of that's kind of just, and then some songs just fall into place immediately.
Yeah.
You have, in every album, I have like one or two songs where you just, I mean, the whole thing just falls into place incredibly easily, effortlessly. And you just think, surely this can't be it. I've hardly spent any effort on this, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But you listen to it and go, oh, well, this just works magically.
Yeah.
And so those, I'll let them be, you know, those magical songs. I'll just leave them alone. And then, but on the rest, I'll just work, you know, I'll just work it.
Yeah, enjoy the gift while it's there.
Yeah.
This has been great. I really have enjoyed this. Thanks again so much for taking the time to be on. And I've got one fun thing I like to do at the end. I kind of call it like the shootout word game, where I just say a word or a phrase and you just fire a word back. There's no right or wrong answers. It's kind of a thing on the show.
Okay.
So, New Age.
Music for healing.
Oh, that's so good. It's great. I definitely agree with that. I need to get more into it.
Yeah,
I think after this interview, I'm going to start, because I found out about you first through the Game of Thrones video a few years ago, and then obviously as prepping for the show, really dove into your work, and it's so true. I mean, it feels it's very high vibration.
Yeah, Fred, I think that's music with a healing heart. I think that's and there's some really good New Age music, and then there's some really bad, you know, people who just on their Casio keyboard at home just put a few chords together and
it's rough.
Put an album out. So, you know, you kind of have to look for it. Look for the, there's some really disappointing, but there's also some exquisitely beautiful music out there, in the new age genre.
South Africa.
Multicultural, the Rainbow Nation. Yeah.
Composing.
Creative juices.
Improv.
Just let it go.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. Sight reading.
Yeah. Comfort zone.
Wow. I wish it was for me.
For me, that's the easiest part.
Classical.
Beauty with limits. Yeah, I mean, when I say that, I just mean that it's so beautiful, but the classical police, sometimes people go towards perfection too much. That's what I mean. Yeah, too much perfection sometimes. That's my criticism of the classical world, because I often prefer listening to a flawed but emotive performance rather than a perfect performance. And in the classical competitions, often the perfection is valued too highly, in my view.
Yeah. Well, you kind of answered this earlier, but microphone,
Yeah, I would say taking responsibility.
Yeah, that's good. Oh, this is funny. Reverb. Literally, it's like number 7 on here.
Essential.
Funny. Delay.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. Do you use it on wind instruments? I guess you could.
Yeah, I actually no. I now use a pre-delay.
Okay.
Mostly
for the reverb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my go-to kind of reverb has a pre-delay in it. I used to use much more delay, and I still depends which producer I work with. Whether they like the delays.
Right.
But I do like the delay. I enjoy it. It mustn't be too much. I like it so when it's just enough so that you can't really hear it's a delay.
Mm-hmm.
It just fills up the room a little bit.
You feel it. Yeah, it's a feel.
Yeah.
America.
Yeah, I used to be critical, but not so much anymore. I used to be quite critical of the US just because of kind of I'm just disappointed in the kind of what you see on TV.
Mm-hmm.
The empty culture.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you watch TV, it's always a kind of a representation of a country's culture.
Right.
You look at American TV, it's kind of disappointing, the depth of but I must say, in the last, especially during pandemic times, I have a lot of respect for the how every viewpoint is allowed to be heard, even though it might be crazy, but just because I was stuck in Australia during the pandemic, and very kind of a bit of a police state.
Yeah.
Where dissenting opinions, people got charged for having they got charged for putting a dissenting opinion on Facebook, for example.
Yeah.
Very shocking,
Yeah.
This one lady was like, she wrote, "These lockdowns are ridiculous, we should protest." The police came to her house, handcuffed her in front of her kids, took her away to the police station for putting that opinion on Facebook.
Right.
And
right. Loss of freedom of speech at that point.
That made me very worried.
Yeah.
And then it made me value the US. I mean, it's incredible that you can whatever your opinion is, you're allowed to state it, and you're allowed to protest. You know,
for now.
Yeah.
For now, you know, and I mean, we'll see. This, I mean, for the music community, this has just it's been crazy, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, 12 months of just like totally locked down in certain areas of the world, and now things kind of opened up. Now, I mean, the Grammys got postponed. I don't know if you saw that, right?
Yeah.
Got postponed. We don't know when they're going to be. And then like the International Blues Challenge got postponed. So it's just wild.
No, it is. It's been crazy, and I believe personally we're turning the corner. I think in a few months we're going to be okay. That's my personal opinion, but I just value the. I think in the US, like in Australia, the musicians I was stuck there. They wouldn't even let me leave.
Wow.
I'm not an Australian citizen.
Right.
I had this big show in Dubai, you know, the Dubai Expo. There was this 190 countries exhibiting there in October, and millions of people, and the South African government booked me to perform there with my band, flew my band there, and I happened to be in Australia, and I have an Australian visa that allows me to go back there, and I wasn't allowed to leave Australia without asking for permission. Even though I'm not an Australian citizen, but I am a resident. I normally split my time between South Africa and Australia. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't even allow me go back to my home country, South Africa. They wouldn't let me leave without permission. So I asked for permission, and I put this whole documentation forward to saying that I have to go to Dubai. It's a huge opportunity.
Right.
My first performing opportunity in 2 years. It's incredible exposure.
Yeah.
And they denied it.
Wow.
They denied my application.
Wow.
So, I mean, they said, sorry, you can't leave Australia. And I mean, I just found that, I mean, overreaching.
I mean, at that point, I would have just jumped on a cargo ship.
Yeah, but you can't. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just like jumping a. That is just unbelievable.
I couldn't leave.
Yeah.
The airline wouldn't let me on because you need that permission to leave, and then I found another way. There was another loophole, not a loophole, but I found another way with extra documentation. Eventually was allowed to leave, but just the overreach, and that made me realize how special things are in the US.
Yeah.
Because in the US that would never happen.
No.
I mean, you'd never say to a US citizen, sorry, you can't go to England, or you know, if that's happened in Australia, like if your dad has got a terminal cancer and happens to be in England, you're allowed to go and visit your dad. In Australia, they didn't allow people to visit family members if they were overseas. So that is kind of a mind-blowing overreach. So I really appreciate the US and even though it gets quite rough, I think it's something special that we need to really appreciate.
Were you able to go to Dubai?
Oh, I eventually got there.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's great. Dubai's nuts. They've got the Lambo cop cars and the what is it? I can't remember the name of that tower. The it starts with
yeah.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, I took a photo.
Burj Khalifa, right? Tallest tower in the world.
Exactly. I know, it's pretty crazy, and the Dubai Expo, it's pretty mind-blowing. It's still happening. It's like a 6-month event. So we loved performing there. It was beautiful to be performing with my band again. So it was really beautiful. And then from Dubai, I came back to the US, and I got stuck here because I didn't want to go to Australia
Yeah, I don't
because I'm
blame you.
worried they're not going to let me out again.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't go back to South Africa because the borders were closed between, so with the Omicron virus, they closed the US borders. So I knew if I went, so they wouldn't allow South Africans into the US. So I knew if I went back to South Africa, I might not be able to come for the Grammys.
Right.
But now they've opened it again, just now, a week ago. So now I'm finally able to leave.
Where are you right now? Are you on the East Coast?
I'm now on the East Coast, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
On the East Coast, yeah.
Okay. Well, the last one I had, that was a diversion, but it was a good diversion. The last word I have on here is pizza.
Oh, not healthy. I try and eat healthy, and but I love my desserts.
Okay.
So I have dessert nearly every day. I love creamy dessert, but so now pizza is in the middle of the road,
Right.
So that's kind of been sacrificed in my, I'm only allowed to have so much decadent food, and pizza is not nice enough to have it all the time.
let me ask you this: like, if I at some point, eventually, I hope I get to South Africa. I think it'd be great. I've heard a lot of great things. I've heard a lot of great, things about South Africa, and a lot of great. Anybody I've met from South Africa, by the way, great people. Like you all are just so nice, so gracious. What type of food? What is like this? Like, you've got to get this when you come to South Africa. Like, what type of food would that be?
Well, the food in South Africa is pretty much, you can find like everything in the US, and it's a multicultural food element. So like you can find Thai food, Chinese food,
Wow.
Italian, a lot of Italian food as well.
Okay.
Some really good pizza, a lot of Italian restaurants, Greek. So there are some special South African dishes that are like, we've got a mincemeat, curried mincemeat called bobotie.
So it's like a native, somewhat, kind of native, like the curry. Yeah.
But the big difference between South Africa and the US is like when I'm in the US, I find it very hard to find. Like last night, I was at this place, at this restaurant. I said, "Do you have any vegetables?" Because I love vegetables. I do eat meat, but I mainly eat fish and vegetables. But they said no. I said, "You don't have one vegetable in this whole restaurant. There's not one vegetable element." They said no. And it wasn't even, she wasn't even like, she was like saying it as if it's the most normal thing,
Yeah.
So in South Africa, in every restaurant you'll find vegetables, and it's just easier to eat healthy.
Right.
So it's kind of here in the US, I find it, there's some amazing food, but you have to go and look for it. If you just stop anywhere and eat anywhere, often there's like no healthy choices available. Like another restaurant I was the other day, I also asked for vegetables. I said, "Yeah, we don't have any veggies. We have salad, but it's only lettuce, in the salad, and then they'll put like cheese and croutons and
a little bit of dressing,
and dressing." And then they said, "Yeah, we used to have broccoli, but nobody ever ordered it, so we discontinued it." So that's different in South Africa. In South Africa, you'll find delicious vegetables everywhere, and delicious meat dishes as well, and fish dishes. But just in general, the portions are smaller, and they're not so sugary. things are not as sugary. You know, here, like the cream, the whipped cream has sugar in it.
Yeah.
It just blows my mind because normally you have whipped cream to kind of take the sugar edge off food.
Right. And they're
Like
just putting it on.
you don't want the extra sugar. So I have an apple crumble. I want the whipped cream as a kind of a neutralizing texture. You
Yeah,
know,
good
you
luck with that. The ready whip, you know,
yeah,
and make
and
your big
that's
pile.
sweet. You can't even have a. I love whipped cream,
Me
but
too.
I can't eat it here. I mean, just have a spoonful of that very sweet whipped cream. I mean, it's just too sweet. So in South Africa, the food's just not that sweet. You know,
Right.
the average food, and I have very little dessert in the US because the desserts are so sweet that
Mm-hmm.
it's impossible to eat some of it. You know, for so I think it's just the US the average taste for sugar is. I mean, people really like sugary things, and the restaurant just make a lot of sugary things. You know,
I'm
like
not
that.
much of a sweets guy myself. You know, I can have like a couple of cookies and that's it. I really can't. Yeah, I like ice cream. That is one thing that I can eat a decent amount of. I like a lot of fruit, you know. So anytime if I'm gonna do ice cream, I'll throw some fruit in there because
Yeah,
at least it
yeah,
kind of balances it out. But
yeah,
I know
yeah.
people. I mean, it is a thing in American culture. I mean, people just go out and they will just pound sugar, and I just can't do it. I'd rather have something salty
Yeah,
or sour even. I'd rather eat, I don't know, something with more of like a harsher
yeah,
texture than sugar.
exactly. And like I had a cucumber salad last night. It was so sweet. They put sugar in the cucumber salad. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's
just
like in the dressing, you know, they will put anything in there. And that's another thing for me is like a salad. I like balsamic vinegar, you know, olive
yeah,
oil, like something
yeah,
with, you know, very earthy
yeah,
texture to it and taste, flavor. And, you know, it's like, no, I don't want like raisins and stuff. Like I get it, it's cool, but I don't like mixing that in a salad.
yeah,
If you know, maybe a little bit of fruit, but
yeah.
yeah.
No, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's. I think it's unique to the US. All the sugar.
Yeah.
Like you don't find that in Europe. In Australia, the food is amazing. Um, um, Excellent, beautiful food everywhere you go, and that's delicious and healthy.
Good barbecue out there.
Yeah,
Do they do
yeah,
barbecue? Yeah. Okay.
yeah. In Australia and in South Africa. South Africa, it's big. They call it braai.
Ah.
Braai. It's the South African word for barbecuing.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. I like good barbecue.
yeah,
It's hit or miss though. You know, it's
yeah,
got to be done right, and it takes a
yeah,
ridiculous amount of time for the marination and all
yeah,
that. You
yeah,
know.
yeah,
Um. So yeah, and I've got real quick about the new album. Before we wrap up, when can we expect it? Are you guys working on it right now? Where, you know, what can we anticipate?
Well, at the moment, we're just still promoting Pangea, the Grammy-nominated album, and so I haven't. I'll just. I'm exhausted, so I'm just going to do some. I've got a few singles coming up,
Okay.
uh, and just releasing those as time goes by. But yeah, the next few, we're still working on some 3 music videos on the new album that we haven't finished, so they'll be coming out on YouTube over the next few months, and then a couple of singles, and I'm considering a tango album. We're starting a tango album, but that's going
Wow.
to take me a few years to finish. We're just starting putting the concepts together at the moment.
Exciting. Exciting. It's great. I asked this one question at the end to everybody, which is if you could go back in time to your 15-year-old self, knowing what you know now, what would you tell him as advice?
Yeah, I think the advice would be that taking it slowly still gets you there. You know, I was very impatient. So
this is something I need to hear. So this is good.
yeah, yeah. I think that's what because I've been very impatient, and it's sometimes helped me to get where, but I've often gone on tangents, you know, and just hectically getting into a tangent without thinking it through enough. So, you know, that's probably.
Well,
what I would advise
hopefully the tangent still got you there, because it seems like it did.
Yeah, I did in the end, you know, and I did learn that, you know, over time.
And I'll ask you this, because you've been in the industry for a while. A lot of people say that and for an engineer, I believe you'll be able to really relate to this, which is, you know, there's really no formula to this industry. There's no formula to the music industry. There's a model, but there's no exact formula per person. I think it's also that way in the business world, but especially in the music world, in the arts and entertainment. Do you agree with that? Number one. Number two, just any final thoughts on that concept from your knowledge and experience?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the creating of the music goes, uh, yeah, I don't follow any formulas or anything. I just go where my heart takes me.
Right.
Um, but there are some. I mean, there are better and worse ways to get your music out there,
Right.
and even that could influence decision what music to make. So, for example, on YouTube, covers do better than original music.
Yep.
So if you want to be successful on YouTube, I think you have to have. It's good to have some covers. The covers that I do in a very creative, different way, and I love doing it. You know, but I think a mix of cover music and like a whole different take on like we did Bohemian Rhapsody, where I replaced all the vocals and all the electric guitars with flute.
Wow, I got to check that out. That's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
I got to check that one out.
So that's like a really fresh cover, you know.
Yeah.
Whole different way. So we put that on YouTube. So so I think, you know, that's an example of how a formula kind of can influence your decision of what songs to make, you know. But I always follow my heart. You know, I'm not going to put anything out there that I'm not absolutely passionate about. But then there are some formulas for example, on YouTube, you have to put regular content out. That's a formula, you know. And basically on Spotify, you also have to release regularly. You know, we're a bit behind in Spotify. Spotify was about 3 years behind in South Africa, so I'm only we didn't have it in South Africa.
Wow.
So I'm slow on that bus, but I mean, it's clear, and there's a way to release on Spotify. You have to release singles rather before you do the album. You know, all those little things that are important. So as a musician, you have to know about these things, and with the theme of taking responsibility for the big picture. So you have to kind of research what's the best way to release, and you take responsibility for the marketing of the album and the marketing of the music, and it becomes very overwhelming. It's just so much to do, you know. So, but so from that point of view, there are better and worse ways. There are formulas to get more out of something. But for me, the music itself is not formulaic at all. You know, for me, I don't follow a formula when I create the music. You know,
yeah. And I mean, Thulsi, I don't know how long you have been working with her from the management side of things. And I mean, it seems like you guys have a really good match, really good synergy.
Yeah, yeah, when I started in 2005, she wasn't in the music industry at all,
Wow.
but she was tired of her job. And I said, don't leave your job, she wanted to come in and help me. And then she took a sabbatical, a year off, and tried it. And she just never went back to her previous job because she just loves it.
Wow.
So she's been my full-time manager since I started, and it's been working really well. Yeah, she's pretty amazing. She's started knowing nothing, and she's really good now.
Sometimes that's the best way to start.
Yeah.
Clean palette with a good amount of skills, but clean palette.
Exactly. Yeah, she broke a lot of rules in the process because she didn't know the rules existed.
Right, and it works.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works.
Yeah. No, we really, if you think about it, for a flutist to start later in life and to still be able to earn a living and be successful is an unlikely story. So we managed to make it happen.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal story. And is there a difference between flutist and flautist, or is it the same thing?
It's the same thing. Everybody, they say flautist. In South Africa, we say flautist usually.
Okay.
In the US, they say flautist or flutist.
Okay.
And but I think just the simplest thing is just to say flutist, because then everybody knows what you're talking about.
Right. Because online it's FLAUTIST.
Yeah, that's flautist or flautist.
Okay. Got it.
But yeah, I just, in the end, sometimes you go to someone who doesn't know anything and you say flautist or flautist, they don't know what you're talking about. If you say flutist, they can figure it out.
Yeah, for sure. This has been great. Again, thanks so much for taking this time to be on the show. And anything else at all before we kind of wrap things up?
I think that's about it. Thanks for chatting. It was really nice chatting to you. Easy, and
great.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being a part of it. And thanks again, everybody, for listening and watching. This has been the Jason Damico Show. Definitely check out Wouter's material below in the description box, and we will see you all on the next episode. Peace.